My first encounter with Star Trek was with The Next Generation, hereafter referred to as TNG. My mom used to watch episodes from time to time. I hardly remember much apart from the main cast and the fact that there were other related shows airing at that time. It wasn't until I saw Star Trek 09 that I decided to check out the TV shows, and while my first impulse was to watch the original series, I also watched TNG alongside, as I was more familiar and comfortable with that show's presentation and characters. Eventually, I started to understand that what I saw in 09 wasn't exactly what the franchise was at its core, and while I still have a fondness for that film, I gravitated more towards this less action-heavy take, focusing on an optimistic view of humanity explored through morality plays. Even with the awful episodes, Star Trek often came with a lesson to be learned, a commentary on our status as a society, and a difficult moral question to overcome. It's been engaging the hearts and minds of its audience since the 1960s, and given that other shows at the time were mostly going for carefree entertainment, that was a rare feat. TNG became my comfort show, something I could always go back to when I couldn't decide what else to watch. And even after seeing every episode, its appeal has not faded for me. Especially with this show, picking 10 episodes as the best is challenging, as while there are definitely some outright terrible episodes that stand alongside the worst films the franchise has ever produced, there are far too many good ones that stay with you long after the credits roll. After Season 2, the level of quality is so consistently high that there are plenty of great episodes left to make a top 50 list where you wouldn't have any real duds. So I apologize in advance if your favorite episode doesn't make my list. This ranking is partly based on what I think makes a quality episode, but the biggest factor here is rewatchability. What episodes do I go back to the most? Which ones strike the closest to home for me? Which ones best embody what I love about this show? I'll list these 10 episodes as close to my personal preference as I can determine, though they're so close in quality that I might not agree with myself next year. Just for fun, I'll throw out 5 additional episodes that nearly made the cut just before I reveal my number 1. In the words of Picard,
let's see what's out there. Engage.
Every Star Trek fan probably has one episode in their top 10 list that would make others raise an eyebrow, and I'll bet The Wounded will be mine. A decorated captain named Maxwell turns renegade and begins attacking Cardassian outposts despite there being a treaty in place. Picard is ordered to keep the peace no matter the cost. One of the crew, Miles O'Brien, served with Maxwell in the past against the Cardassians, and he is brought in to help rein in the rogue captain. During the course of this chase, our heroes must learn the complications of living with a former enemy, and that letting go of the past doesn't mean forgetting its lessons. Captain Maxwell is played by Bob Gunton, a noted character actor who you might recognize as the Warden from Shawshank Redemption. I love that Gunton plays Maxwell as a relatable antagonist. He's certainly not evil at his core, but he's horribly misguided and threatens to bring on the very war he hopes to prevent by taking action all himself. Colm Meaney finally gets a real chance to shine here, which I imagine led to his role in the main cast of Deep Space Nine later, as does Mark Alamo in one of his many Trek roles. The final scene with Picard and Golma Set is what elevates this episode so high. Picard was ordered to keep the peace, and he did everything he could to that end, but he's not an idiot. Maxwell was probably acting on valid information, and while Picard chooses not to follow him to war, he did listen and is not going to dismiss his claims. This cemented Picard as my favorite captain. He is equally dedicated to his mission and orders, but he's not sleepwalking through this life. He is alert and ready to defend the Federation, walking the tightrope between the boundaries of his authority, the overriding rule of law, and his conscience. I feel The Wounded is an overlooked episode and deserves more of the spotlight than it gets. It's a more somber and reflective piece that not only foreshadows the type of storytelling we'll see later on in the franchise, but it perfectly shows why in our progression to perfection, we cannot be blind followers and hope to survive. The first of 3 two-parters on this list, Chain of Command is a standout mostly for its acting chops and dark tone. It's a prototype DS9 story, and it's filled with characters having personal conflicts, Cardassian ploys that make us question how committed they are to peace, and a willingness to depict situations and themes not normally explored on the other shows. Starfleet intelligence receives word of a superweapon being developed by the Cardassians that violates the treaty. Picard, Worf, and Dr. Crusher are covertly sent in to locate and destroy the weapon, while Riker and the rest of the Enterprise deal with a new captain with a more straightforward, no-nonsense style of command. Upon arriving at the location, Picard realizes it's a trap and gets captured by the Cardassians, while Worf and Dr. Crusher escape. Now Picard is being tortured for information while the Enterprise navigates some tricky waters, both with the Cardassian negotiations and Riker butting heads with the new captain. Obviously, this is an acting highlight for Patrick Stewart and Jonathan Frakes, but what makes this episode shine are the 2 prominent guest stars, Ronny Cox and David Warner. Ronny Cox has one of the toughest jobs an actor has ever had on this show, in portraying a captain that's very rigid in his demands, though completely sympathetic and even a bit personable with the crew when he can be. It's wonderful to watch him and Frakes face off against each other as both have a point in their arguments. The late great David Warner delivers a powerful performance as the Cardassian interrogator, being well versed in the psychological aspect of torture as well as developing a bond with Picard. The whole story can be a bit slow in pace, and it honestly feels out of place with the typical TNG vibe, but those things are in truth some of its greatest assets, and it makes for a gripping outing that shows a new side to the Star Trek universe we hadn't seen much of before then. It's also one of the few times I've seen a single episode pitch stretched out into 2 and it results in a better story. If you ever wanted to see an episode that encapsulated everything that Star Trek is about at its core, The Measure of a Man might be a fine pick, which is surprising given how early it came in the show's run. Season 1 had a reputation for being mostly awful, and while Season 2 does little to correct that perception, there are a few bright spots here and there, and this episode is often the first to be pointed out. When an order comes through that Data must transfer himself to the care of Commander Bruce Maddox, a highly regarded officer in the field of robotics who wants to dismantle Data in order to learn more about him, Picard looks for a legal solution to prevent this. It's a rather simple premise that allows for some fantastic acting, especially from Stewart and Brent Spiner. I love how Data is often used to explore humanity, being an outsider who cannot understand what that means, and this episode proves that while Data is undeniably different from other life forms, he is one of us in the most important and fundamental of ways. This show also showcases some fine acting from Riker, who reluctantly agrees to represent Maddox. While this episode does overly simplify the courtroom process, it's extremely effective in providing a capable conduit for analyzing the question of Data's sentience. As a side note, TNG has quite a few courtroom episodes, and there's a reason beyond modest episode budgets for that. Other than Picard's examination of Maddox and his subsequent speech, my favorite scene is the ending, where Data explains why he does not begrudge Riker for doing his duty. The only reason it isn't higher is because Picard is still quite stiff as a character, as is some of the dialogue, and I think the banter between Picard and the JAG officer gets in the way of fully sympathizing with her character. That aside, this is the first real evidence that TNG could match its predecessor in quality. It would just take a little longer for the show overall to get there. If I was judging these episodes based on story logic, TNG's finale wouldn't make the list. However, All Good Things is saved by being a wonderful tribute to the show and for knowing how to leave an audience emotionally at the end. Picard is traveling through time, though we don't know why or how the times were chosen. Slowly we see there are common elements to each of the eras, all hinting to a greater mystery. We soon see that it is Q that is responsible for the time traveling, and that in a way, this is a continuation of the trial we saw back in the very first episode. He reveals that Picard himself is responsible for this ordeal and must solve this problem by proving humanity can evolve beyond physical achievements and societal progress before all of humankind is wiped out. In this finale, we are given a glimpse of the past, present, and a possible future for these characters, reminding us of the journey we've undertaken with them and that there is still room left to grow with them. It brings back some fan-favorite characters like Q, Tasha Yar, and Miles O'Brien. And it delivers what would be an excellent cap to both Q and Picard's dynamic, as well as reminding us what the name Star Trek means. The franchise was never about the future of our species in terms of environment or technology, but in humanity evolving beyond current mindsets and becoming greater beings than we ever thought possible. It's a perfect reminder of Gene Roddenberry's vision for the franchise, and that in order to become the saints he thought we could be, we must undergo change through our trials and earn that status. The reason it's a little lower on the list than I'd like is because the episode doesn't fully follow through on its own logic for the anomaly, and the mystery is drawn out a little too long. All that said, All Good Things ends the show on a high note and leaves us feeling satisfied for the here and now, which is a feat I can't say of most other shows. A fan-favorite episode, Darmok depicts an encounter with the children of Tamar, a race known for being unintelligible in their language. Picard and the Tamarian captain are beamed down to the planet to face a powerful foe in an attempt to develop a connection with each other, proving there is a hopeful future of cooperation between the Tamarians and the Federation. This episode is obviously about communication, though the emphasis is placed on the unspoken connections we make with each other, and that no barrier is too great to pass in our attempt for unity with each other. You'll notice by now most of my favorite episodes tend to be Picard-centered ones, and most of that is because Patrick Stewart is the best actor on the show, and he thrives in delivering subtle acting gestures in more psychologically complex stories. Despite the impression you may get from the 4 TNG films, Picard is not primarily an action hero, but a diplomat and a thinker. He's not one to take action without consideration and deliberation, making for a leader you can trust and feel safe with. This episode also contains a fantastic Paul Winfield performance, and weirdly makes the best use of Deanna Troi on this list. Plus, I love the progression of the episode. We are just as confused as the Enterprise crew at the beginning, and by the end, we know exactly what is being communicated between Picard and the Tamarians. While you can certainly pick apart the Tamarian language as you wish, I'd rather leave it alone and treat it as a conceit. A give me we must hand the episode in order to experience a tale that speaks to the inner spirit of humanity and our desire to relate to our fellow brothers and sisters beyond language and cultural impediments. See, it's not all Picard episodes here. Okay, Picard does have a large role to play in the Pegasus, but the central protagonist is Will Riker, who overall is actually my favorite character on the show. Admiral Pressman comes on board the Enterprise with a mission to locate his former ship, the Pegasus, which Will served on with him. The Admiral isn't very forthcoming with the reason behind the mission, except with Riker, who already knows it. Picard must operate in the dark on a salvage operation that the Admiral is hellbent on, while Riker must decide if his sense of honor and loyalty is compatible with his conscience. I absolutely adore getting a glimpse at what made Riker the first officer on the Federation flagship and why he is more concerned with the safety of his crew than the mission. He's an officer that follows his sense of right and wrong without worrying about his career, which is why Picard trusts him so much. Riker is the kind of man that the Federation really needs, and he proves that when he finally makes the right choice to expose Admiral Pressman's treachery, even though it will be damaging to his own career. Watching Frakes play out this moral debate throughout the episode until he makes his stand plays exactly into what I admire most from this show. Inner struggles with characters we relate to are far more interesting than big explosion fests or galactic apocalypses. In fact, the Pegasus is one of the most low-key and spectacle episodes that I've chosen. And yet, I bet I can get most of my non-Trekkie friends interested in the show just by watching this episode. That's how much of an impact it leaves on you. Or at least, how much of an impact the Pegasus leaves on me. Bottle episodes can be tough to make stand out. However, director Jonathan Frakes makes it look easy. One of the best courtroom drama episodes, the Drumhead shows a retired admiral coming in to investigate a possible conspiracy on the Enterprise. However, when it is shown that the initial cause of concern is unfounded, the admiral continues her quest to root out all traitors, to the point where it becomes rampant paranoia and even Picard is being questioned. I can see the argument that this is not a particularly subtle episode, as the message is hard to miss. However, given how much more relevant the lesson becomes over time in the real world, I'd say that some direct examination about this topic is necessary, since many people are showing that their perceived sense of safety is more important to them than freedom for all. To echo a phrase from Benjamin Franklin, those who trade liberty for safety deserve neither. This episode contains one of my favorite Picard speeches, which gets interrupted by an equally brilliant outburst from Admiral Sati, showcasing what kind of inhuman witch hunt she is committed to and provoking a walkout from the head of Starfleet security. This is also a great episode for Worf, especially within the context of the show. His true family history is yet to be made public, and so someone who has a burning secret to hide being this committed to helping root out enemies makes for an interesting contradiction. The man perhaps most afraid of the truth coming out is the Enterprise crew member most suspicious of everyone for hiding anything. I go back to this episode time and time again, and I'm left speechless by the end every time. Probably the most famous of all TNG stories, and almost certainly the one most referenced by later media, The Best of Both Worlds depicts the first attempted invasion of the Federation by the Borg, and it's completely compelling. It's also the show's first two-parter, which did lead to an unfortunate trend for Star Trek overall, but it manages to pull off a spectacular cliffhanger, with Picard as Locutus threatening the Enterprise and Riker ordering Worf to fire on the Borg cube. There are many reasons this two-parter makes my list, from the tense atmosphere of Part 1 to the solid conclusion of Part 2, Stewart leading a terrific cast who all get a moment to shine, all of this accompanied by the best score Ron Jones ever offered the show. But I think what puts it ahead of so many others is because it's a story about Riker. Yes, Picard has a monumental experience with his time as Locutus, but Riker gets the arc here. All throughout Part 1, he is unsure if he is ready to take command on his own, if he has become too comfortable and complacent. The cliffhanger proves that knowing the full consequences of his decision, Riker's pronouncement of fire shows he is ready to make the tough calls. However, Part 2 furthers this arc, demonstrating that he can also lead the crew through the toughest of times and use each of their talents wisely. Q even says in an episode of Voyager that the Federation would have been assimilated if Riker wasn't the one in command. It's one of his finest moments, as well as an all-around great story, and it's rightly regarded as the turning point when TNG became an equal to the original series in the eyes of the public. Resistance to this tale's allure is futile. One of the most widely regarded episodes of TNG, Yesterday's Enterprise takes a fun alternate reality concept and really delivers on it. A ghost from the past, the Enterprise C, thought to be lost in battle, comes through a time anomaly and instantly rewrites history. The Federation is now in a losing war with the Klingons. Tasha Yar is still alive, with no war for Troy in sight, and the Enterprise D is now a warship without families. This episode shows us a story about the impact small things can have on history, which will be a recurring theme on this show. As Picard says, one ship now won't make much of a difference, but it could have 20 years ago. Plus, it allows for Tasha to exit the show more gracefully than she did originally, at least until redemption comes along and gives her a second horrifically tragic death, but oh well. Everyone is acting their face off in this episode, selling us on these characters being largely the same, but just different enough that we buy them as having a different past. This is a great Guinan episode too. Whoopi Goldberg asked Gene Roddenberry and Rick Berman for a role on the show, as she was inspired by Nichelle Nichols from the original series, and she became one of the show's greatest B-cast characters. Here, the noted actress gets a chance to drive the episode's narrative without taking over from the leads, and it's a masterclass in effectively using a side character. Yesterday's Enterprise is one of the most rewatchable hours the show ever had to offer, and I really can't think of any notable flaws with it. As Picard says towards the end, history will never forget the name Enterprise. Like I said towards the beginning, there are plenty of great episodes that could have made this list. But before I reveal my absolute favorite, let's pay some recognition to the few that almost made it. The Offspring is one of the saddest of Star Trek episodes. I love seeing Data go through a very human experience, and while he says he can't feel the appropriate emotions, I question how true that is. It's a fantastic way to build off of the ideas from The Measure of a Man. Sins of the Father wasn't the first notable Klingon-centered episode of the show, but it is one of the best. It introduces us to a complex storyline for Worf, as well as gives us a detailed look into the Klingons and what honor really means to them beyond the violence. TNG was not afraid to let its regulars take a back seat when the story demanded it, and First Contact, not to be confused with the later film of the same name, is a great example. One of the most unusual episodes, I find this one crosses my mind a lot when viewing our current society and seeing how some resist moving into a new world, as it threatens the old one they have built their lives around. The episode I most hate leaving off my list, The Inner Light, takes a fantastic concept for a story that only science fiction can do, pairs it with the show's finest actor, and is a touching look on how now is the most precious time in our lives. Plus, it has one of the most beautiful and haunting melodies from all of Trek, so it has that going for it. Relics is a clear example both of how TNG can have fun and use its guest stars to the fullest. James Doohan reprises his iconic role of Scotty meeting with the crew of the Enterprise D, and discovers that just because something is old, that doesn't mean it's obsolete. Tapestry is the It's a Wonderful Life episode and details a brilliant lesson on the nature of our lives. Suffering from a fatal wound in sickbay, Picard sees Q in a vision. In their discussion, he reveals one of his greatest regrets, and Q makes him relive the event in an effort to see how defining a moment this was for the man who became Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Our mistakes are just as key to our identity as our successes and achievements, and to look at them otherwise would be to dismiss the people we are today. If we were to correct those mistakes and see the new result, we would hardly recognize ourselves and be comfortable in our own skins. Not only is this the best Picard episode for me, it's also the best Q episode. Q and Picard's evolving dynamic is fascinating, and writer Ron Moore, along with actor John Delancey, presents us with the best take on Q, the omnipotent life form who takes an interest in humanity and its progression into becoming more. Beyond the profound moral of this story, I love watching Picard in the past being the more reserved person he wishes he was, and seeing how far that road leads away from who he is now. Q's fun meddling and getting a glimpse into Picard's past with his best friends are also highlights. The finest hour TNG ever gave us, with a message that rings true with the central Roddenberry vision, Tapestry stands above all of the other 177 episodes, making it one of the best stories that Star Trek has ever offered. Rather than commiserating about such and such episodes not being here, I'd rather invite you to leave your own favorites down in the comments below, and tell us why this show still matters to you over 30 years after it finished its run. TNG was one of many turning points for the franchise. It was the first show to prove there was a future for Star Trek beyond Kirk and Spock. It started to move away from some of the Roddenberry edicts in order to make way for new kinds of stories and conflicts. And most importantly, It proved that the original series was not a fluke. Star Trek is one of the giants of speculative fiction and has more to offer than anyone first thought. TNG also became, so far, the only Trek show other than the original to escape its science fiction trappings and break into wider popular culture. Chances are that anyone who knows who Spock was also knows Data and Worf. TNG remains one of the most popular science fiction shows ever created, as well as the one I go back to the most often. That's because I never fail to gain hope from the show. Whenever I'm feeling at my lowest, Star Trek The Next Generation can restore my faith in mankind and make me hope for a better future. And that's not a minor miracle these days.